Hey everyone, so in this video we're going to talk about oil painting, and it's almost been a month now since I started painting in oils or in any traditional mediums. So yeah, I will be talking about that and walking you through my process for making these paintings. So the first step is always using gesso, and after applying gesso I usually leave it out to dry for like an hour or so, and then I use a sandpaper to smooth it out a bit. And after this step, that is where I start sketching, and this is where I am figuring out the proportions and where I want the person to be on the paper.
A few moments later.
And another thing that I wanted to talk about is how you hold your pencils, as that is very important. As you can see, I'm holding my pencil sideways and I'm not jamming the tip of the pencil in. And what holding your pencil sideways does is also that it kind of sharpens itself as it is rubbing against the grain of the paper, if that makes sense. And when I'm happy with what I have laid down with the pencil, that is where I start painting. So a really big problem that I noticed right off the bat when I started painting was like, I'm not making enough of a mix. So what I mean by that is that when you're starting to paint, just have a big enough mix for at least the average color already on your palette. So a really good way to notice what the average color is just squinting down your eyes and averaging out whatever you see in front of you in the reference. And squinting is a great way to do that. It kind of lets you ignore all the unnecessary details and just lets you capture the essence of what makes the person look like that person in that particular moment. And if you are a beginner, then just don't get too excited by colors and go in way too early. You know how that alla prima thing works, where the painters are deciding it on the go and they're kind of making the proportions with the paint itself, and they have no underneath sketching layer. Yeah. I don't fuck with none of that. I don't fuck with none of that. And I don't mean to say that it's a bad method to work. It's a great method. I sometimes use it just when I'm practicing, but even at this stage, since I am an artist who uses pencils and graphite and charcoal for most of his work, oil painting is still a new method to me. I've done alla prima, if you can call it that, in digital softwares like Procreate, but I don't know, it's not called alla prima. But anyways, I have done that even traditionally a couple of times, but it's not really for me to experiment with right now. Like, I'm still a beginner, so I want to make sure that if I'm putting down the paint, it's at least in the ballpark of where it should be, instead of like me deciding it on the go and deciding it while doing it. Like, it reminds me of that quotation where it says that the worst time to learn how to fight is during the fight. Like, I agree with that. Like, at least where I am at in my painting journey, I do have to understand that I do not yet possess the capabilities to do that. And painting in itself is tricky as it is. Like, you have to kind of juggle three quantities instead of the two that I'm used to.
What do you mean? What do you mean?
What I mean by that is that painting as compared to sketching is really a different game. As in sketching, you're kind of controlling and messing around with this with just one attribute of color, that is the value. So any color that you see in your real life or in photographs have three attributes, three qualities that you kind of have to juggle to make the perfect painting. And those qualities are: number one is hue, whether the color is red, yellow, or blue. And the second one is the saturation, how chromatic it is. And you know how people are often talking about different shades of a color? It's not exactly shades, but let's say you have two reds, then you can absolutely figure out which one is a cooler red and which one is a warmer red. So there are different degrees of chroma or saturation of colors. And the third one is the value, which is how light or dark a color is. And this is where it gets tricky, because drawing is something where you only have to take care of one attribute, which is the value. So basically it only has one axis which you have to take care of, which is the x-axis. And when you're starting to paint, you realize like it's not one-dimensional anymore. I don't just have to take care of the values, there are two additional dimensions, which makes it kind of like a 3D thing. because now I don't just have to take care of the value, I have to make sure that the hue is correct, and then I have to make sure that the saturation is always on point. And it's kind of debatable because I also think that values kind of overshadow the role of the other things. So in a painting, if you have the values correct, then there is a good chance that it is going to work when you look at it from a distance. And you can be a little bit off about the saturation, but again, there is a little bit of wiggle room, and it cannot be just totally different than what you're seeing in the reference. And values, however, in both cases, they're not as forgiving, and you have to make sure that you nail them so you can indicate the turn of the forms. And this is my third oil painting. So a really big mistake that, well, it's not really a mistake, but it's something that you have to take care of while you're painting. So basically all the decision making is kind of going on in the palette. Like, you're not making that kind of decisions on the canvas. At least you're making those decisions and you're mixing your colors on the palette, right? So make sure that you're responsive to whatever colors you're adding. So what I mean by that is that, let's say you have to darken up a color a bit. Like, let's say you have to darken up a red, and the color that you see is also kind of like in a purpley range. So when you do add the blues into your mix or whatever, it's something that you need to take care of all the time. So when you're adding a color to darken or lighten something up, make sure that you also take into account what kind of changes is it going to make in the hue of the color that you're mixing. And if it's get a little bit too blue, then you have to add orange to lighten it up, and that's going to change the value. So you have to constantly be in negotiation, if that makes sense. And another really important thing that I learned within 30 days of oil painting is that you need to hit that perfect point at which the brush is just loaded with the correct amount of paint. And it's one of those things that you really need to experiment with yourself, and you'll just know it when you do it. Like, you don't want the paint to be so little that it kind of just scratches off the paint underneath, and you don't want it to be so much that it kind of leaves on a creamy paint on top of whatever you've worked with. And it's a good challenge for me to force myself to learn how to paint with these mediums, as I am someone who just loves drawing in paper. I just think that it's such a great medium to work with, as you know, you can just have your fun with it, and you don't have to worry about the hues, saturations and all that. You can just have a pencil and an eraser and you're all set. And I think this is it for the video, and I hope this helped you out, and I'll see you in the next one.